Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to another edition of Black Focus. I'm your host, Ron Edwards, coming to you on a Tuesday, May 1st, 2018, if you will. A day of celebration in some countries around the world, if you will. A lot of things going on, but we're going to do quite a bit of local stuff today, if you will, and it's not stuff, it's information, updates, and etc. with regards to what is happening in our city and our country and across the world, if you will. President Trump and his chief of staff, John Kelly, are at it again, if you will, at least playing like they don't get along. But Kelly's a piece of work. Problem on the southern border, just outside of San Diego, where maybe 1,000 refugees, if you will, have arrived a couple days ago from allegedly places in Central America. They started out, they were 3,000 or 4,000 strong, according to the information that we were getting a month and a quarter ago. But 4,000 or 5,000 wound up falling by the wayside in Mexico, but at least 1,000, according to the news accounts. Hopefully it's not fake news, if you will, has gotten through that at least 1,000, maybe 35 or 40 as we speak here in studio, coming to you from the studios of MTN and its studios and corporate headquarters. So we will keep an eye on that situation. Some have already been taken into custody and detained, if you will. I don't think that a lot of the mothers know that they will be immediately separated from their children for up to 6, 7, 8, 9 months, depending on what an immigration judge says. How many defense attorneys, immigration defense attorneys, or otherwise attorneys who are knowledgeable and proficient in understanding immigration laws. The President Donald Trump at an activity, another one of his campaign stops in a place called Washington, Michigan, which is north of Detroit. In fact, up in the area of the guys that were involved in the bombing of the Murrah building almost 20 years ago. You remember that bombing of the federal building there killed all those little children and babies and a disproportionate number of black children. Daycare center there for employees in the Murrah building would leave their children there in the daycare. A beautiful facility, beautiful babies, and etc., all blown apart. As we have talked about over the years, we were in Kansas City at the time of the terrorist attack. McVeigh, if you remember, McVeigh, the name of the individual who has been put to death. I think they wanted to get rid of him pretty quick. They did not want McVeigh to talk in terms of the relationships he had. It'll be like the same thing that will befall the young man, Root, involved in the shooting at the Mother Emanuel church there in Charleston, South Carolina, a couple of years ago. So many mysterious things happen in the United States, if you will, around the world. It's difficult to kind of keep up, catch up, whatever it is. I mean, just this program alone, we could just touch on subject matters that don't even get to the local scene, the domestic scene, and take up the entire hour of this program. It's really an interesting world that we live in, if you will. Continued friction. Back to the situation on the border, just outside of San Diego. We said 35 as of the taping of this program have been taken into custody, if you will, and so we will see what will happen. They're already saying there are not enough immigration judges and attorneys and et cetera. So that is a signal to these refugees who came here from, let's say, Central America, to know that they could be detained for a year and then sent back over the border into Mexico and et cetera. It's interesting. The president's base, if you will, screaming that paramilitary forces need to be allowed in. It's going to be interesting because I don't think that the president is going to get any activation of the California National Guard. He will have to federalize them. Democratic Governor Jerry Brown is not going to make his National Guard available under his authority, but that authority can be taken away from him if the president decides to federalize the California National Guard. The National Guard in Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas have clearly indicated that they are prepared to do whatever the president orders, if you will, so that will be watched very, very closely in the coming weeks or whatever. We'll be lucky if we don't have a couple deaths if along the border. I'm talking about deaths that will actually become known to the public. People die every day along the border from the Pacific Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico, if you know what we mean. And so we watch all of this in a country in which a president has been accused by his own chief of staff behind his back of being unhinged, which, that's great, for folks, talking about a backyard barbecue or something like that. But for a man who has, the power to give the codes to send hundreds of nuclear warheads screaming anywhere in the world, to declare by a former four-star general, that is his chief of staff, Kelly, that the president is unhinged. He also called the president an idiot. President, clearly asked Kelly if any statement was made. These guys lie so much, and they know that they all lied. When Kelly probably told the president, no, Mr. President, I didn't call you an idiot, Trump knew that Kelly was lying. Kelly knew that Trump knew that he was lying. Kelly knew he was lying. But it's all a part of the misogynist game, really. And it's misogynist that these people play, but it's a dangerous, dangerous game. President really hoping that something happens with North Korea's leader, and so that the president can not go to the peace conference. Information early this morning on the airwaves indicating that the conference between these leaders will be held on the DMZ, the demilitarized zone. That's what's being said, though a number of countries had offered, such as Sweden, if you will, and some others. President probably feeling that he needs the protection of those 38,000 American forces there, if you will. But the real matter is he's being backed up by, a 500,000 strong South Korean army and a North Korean army that's 2 million strong. North Korea is having nuclear capabilities, having cruise missiles and et cetera. Because you're not informed of what the military hardware of the North Koreans are. You know that the South Koreans do not have access to nuclear weapons, and supposedly the United States deployment on the sovereign soil of South Korea are not to have nuclear weapons, probably do. Of course, the United States has nuclear weapons in Japan, if you will, but then on the other side of the aisle, the Chinese have nuclear weapons, a massive arsenal. The Russians have an even more massive arsenal, if you will, and so everybody is. How did they put it last week? Locked and loaded, if you will, like we're in some kind of John Wayne cowboy Tom Mix movie, if you will. So that's the kind of instability that we're looking at in this country as we speak from these studios and this chair this afternoon. It is kind of frightening, if you will. You just kind of pray, and man, I need pray for the best, if you will. and hope for the best. And that's part of what we're looking at right now. A lot of things happening with the stability of the Congress, if you will. The head of the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, he's a crook. Former Attorney General of the state of Oklahoma, boy, I can imagine what kind of jurisprudence and justice that poor people and people of color have been getting in Oklahoma during this character's time as Attorney General. Just came out again today, though they talked about it. These people even forget what it is that they call themselves alerting us, the general public, about a private aircraft that the administrator of the EPA was leasing for $100,000 a month just to be standby. His security detachment, in fact, he actually has more security people surrounding him than President Un of North Korea, if you will, and maybe even Donald Trump. Got to be careful with that, because if Donald Trump finds out that his EPA director got more security than he's got, that'll be the thing that could send this character out of the office, if you will. The Congress, really doesn't know what they're going to do. Interesting situation yesterday. We had definitely reminded ourselves to talk about it because it is a part of some of the library that we have here, as usual, with us, our personal library, if you will. That book in the middle should be of great interest to those of us in the African American community, Medical Apartheid. But the other two books are equally important, if you will, and just to take a look at 9/11. You always need to do that, and also The Man Who Cried I Am, which is very scary with regards to what was happening during the civil rights struggle of the 1960s. Some people try to say that it's fiction. It's not, but you have to know the history. Boy, history is so important, and we are so lacking in it, particularly in the community of the young, if you will, the community, quote unquote, of color, and etc. But again, all you can tell people is to, familiarize themselves, update themselves, if you will. Try to pay attention to what's going on around you. Don't always keep your head down looking at your iPad or texting or whatever, which could be, a problem for your health, injurious to your health, and etc. So we have all of these things that are going on, and so one of the things we wanted to make mention that we said just minutes ago was the propaganda piece that was put out by the Israelis yesterday. And we were going to bring a book entitled Israel and America's Foreign Policy, if you will, and really talks in terms of how the Israelis over the years played the United States. But in return for being good Israelis, if you will, they were given access to nuclear capabilities and were able to have quote unquote nuclear weapons when all of their neighbors are denied access to nuclear weapons. In fact, in our next column in the Minnesota Spokesman Recorder, we will be writing an article entitled Why Israel, if you will. Why does Israel have nuclear weapons in the midst of the Middle East and et cetera, and all of its neighbors? That's why there is such tension between the Iranians and the Israelis and, of course, the United States and et cetera. And by the way, on the 12th of May, the president will, quote unquote, be making his determination if, in fact, he's going to take the United States out of the Iranian nuclear package, which would make him really an idiot and would make you wonder how in the heck he would think that he could sit down at the table with a very intelligent man such as the leader of North Korea and anybody else and expect them to buy into your nonsense, if you will, to your fake promises, if you will, to your fake declarations of intent and honor and all of those things. John McCain this morning issued a kind of a press statement. John McCain is dying. Stage 4 cancer of the brain, if you will. I mean, he's a brave man. He's a very honorable man, John McCain, Republican senator from Arizona, ran against Barack Obama in 2008, if you will, but he's always been a man that can see and has vision. Served 6 years in a prison camp in North Vietnam, if you will, during the Vietnamese War, and went through some pretty brutal things. But he was a patriot. He served his country. He fought for his country. And he's been a good United States Senator. John McCain, the Republican of Arizona. But man, he said some very profound and deep reflections in his most recent book, which I think hit the news shelves yesterday. Again, we're taping on a Tuesday here from the corporate studios of MTN. For those that like to read and can understand the depth of what they're reading, you know, may want to do that. He has some interesting observations about Washington and the Republicans and everybody else, but he has some really interesting observations about Donald Trump. And they're not far away from the observations that James Comey, the former director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, if you will, had been talking on the talk shows ever since his book came out 2 weeks ago. I mean, he's just been blasting Trump, and it's part of, I think, the statements of those, you know, Kelly said that he didn't call the president an idiot and etc. You've got to know, being around this guy, President of the United States, you've got to really be terrified, if you will. At what point it is you have to activate that plan. Oh, there is a plan of how you deal with the chief executive who becomes, quote unquote, unhinged, if you will, displays mental problems and conditions which no longer make him fit for the presidency of the United States. And by the way, the Constitution does allow a majority of the cabinet, in fact, about 3/4 of the cabinet of a president, to take action to remove the president. No one likes to talk about that because they figure that most of these guys that are, and ladies, they have a couple women, that are in the cabinet are just as big a crooks and hypocrites as he is. But for those that have sons and daughters and grandsons and granddaughters and etc., looking forward to a future, if you will, or for those that have, because Kelly, as an example, already has lost a son to conflict. He had a son that was killed about, 13 years ago in Afghanistan, if you will. There are others, McMasters and others who have either served or are serving, who understand what it is to lose a child or to lose friends and et cetera, to conflict, war, and et cetera. And so that aspect is being kept kind of undercover, if you will, and I think as a historian, journalist, I clearly know and understand, been out here long enough, to have seen constitutional crises, if you will, the assassination of Kennedy, the assassination of his brother, and nothing to say about the assassination of African Americans, who, if it had not been for the strength of the African American community, this may have become a country altogether different. And we wouldn't have been able to sit here, by the way, in these studios and give an analysis of what is happening, how it is happening, and the danger that the United States is looking at internally, more internally right now than externally. And the reason that the reflections by John McCain in his book, as we said, that we think went on sale yesterday across the world, it makes so much sense about the tenuous situation that we're in. But back to the Israelis. The Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, who is a man himself under investigation for corruption and criminal activity, and et cetera. And now he's pulling the same things that Donald Trump has been a master at, but it's not the first time the United States has done this. The United States did this just before preparation for entering the First World War, if you will, and definitely just before entering the Second World War, when we, as a nation, tried to make it appear that we were caught off guard by the attacks by the Japanese on American territories and et cetera. There are a number of books, good books, one by former Admiral, now obviously deceased, named King. And for those of you that like it on your little websites and et cetera, you may want to go and take a look at that under military history and quote unquote a misrepresentation. It was worse, really, than our weapons of mass destruction. And by the way, the character who was involved in that lie, which still has the United States engaged in some shape and form militarily in Iraq and Afghanistan, John Bolton, if you will, I mean, a man who is clearly crazy, if you will. He and the president, though, get along well together because they talk in terms of killing hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people of color, as we talked about on last week's program. In fact, that's where we were going. That's what we were laying out to you, our viewing audience, about just how dangerous and toxic, it seems to be a nicely used word, this Trump administration has become, if you will. Bolton, I mean, this man, you look at him, he looks like the epitome of evil, if you will, but he's sick. He's a man who's very sick, and yesterday, in supporting this false information that was put out by Israel's prime minister, in which he made a personal presentation from Tel Aviv, or from Jerusalem, to the department, the State Department, etc. He made sure everything was in English, so that the American officials would have no problem interpreting. Netanyahu, by the way, has a pretty good command of English, if you will, and he should be. He lived for a number of years in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where he was known as a raging racist, if you will. Media doesn't talk about that as much as they did maybe 10, 12 years ago as Netanyahu was coming to power his first time around as Prime Minister of Israel. But he makes this presentation yesterday to the President and to the White House and et cetera, and he was talking. And lo and behold, folks went back and vetted and researched it, et cetera, and they found out that he made statements about the Iranians being liars, and the Iranians still had a nuclear program. And he used words and statements that were made 8, 9 years ago, as the Obama administration was negotiating the nuclear deal with the Iranians, if you will. I mean, really, it's the talk of media right now. For those of you that didn't pay any attention on the day that we taped this program, which, as we said, was Tuesday, I mean, just go back, take a look at your recording machine and et cetera, and call up some of those programs that you like to watch, because they busted him. I mean, they busted the Israeli Prime Minister, they busted National Security Advisor Bolton, making reference and identifying as time certain statements that have been made, as we said, 7, 8 years ago, 9 years ago, by these characters. I mean, there is no shame, if you will. And by the way, there is technology being worked on now, and it's interesting that they were showing it a couple days ago, that they kept showing Barack Obama as a test tube, if you will. Yes, they did. where you can display the image of a Barack Obama or any other black person, if you will, and you can falsify the electronic transmission of their voice and et cetera, if you will. It's fascinating technology. Actually, the Russians and the Americans and the Chinese have been using it. You know, they just don't tell us about it, if you will. Probably many of us would, many folks would not be able to handle it with regards to what is going on and how it is going on, et cetera. So it's just a part of the explosion of corruption, dishonesty, but danger. The most important piece of this narrative, this puzzle, is the danger, the threat, not only to the institution of democracy and et cetera, the threat to your life, if you will. If all of these people, you know, start believing the garbage that they have helped to put out there, and they start pushing buttons and et cetera. We've oftentimes said on this program, particularly in the last 2 years, since the emergence of Donald Trump to be president of the United States, that it's going to fool around. None of us will be here. We won't even be remembered, but in some place far, far away, some galaxy, some scientists will be talking in terms of a bright light that took 500 million years to get to them, maybe even 500,000 light years, that went out suddenly one night as they were looking at the stars in their observatory, if you will, and there was a bright light in some galaxy that they will name and et cetera, and there was a bright star, planet Earth, and that it just went out. It ceased to be, if you will. And people can pretend that, oh, that's far-fetching and et cetera, but if you really study astronomy, if you will, the galaxy, et cetera, you have to know and understand that we here on this little planet, we're not the first planet to get here in this vast solar system and galaxy and et cetera. And it's probably important maybe to try to work with your children and make them understand, but of course, for many of you, you have to educate your own self and make your own self understand what is happening. But one of the things that has happened with this Trump presidency is that it's made people, a lot of folks won't fess up to it, but it's made people kind of rub their hands together like this and cringe and et cetera, because they are realizing how easy it is for misrepresentation, lies, and consequences as it pertains to that to take place and to happen. And so we watch with great amusement, though it's not amusing, if you will. The Israeli Prime Minister, you know, who right now, as he was speaking yesterday, is killing Palestinians along the Gaza Strip and other locations in Israel, if you will. And they're doing an interesting thing, by the way, on that particular point. They are using military snipers to create fatalities, but also wounding a lot of people, if you will, which puts a tremendous hardship on the Palestinian medical community, a community which is already stretched out, if you will, with regards to hospitals, clinics, and et cetera. And I thought, well, that's a well-devised, very mean-spirited, particularly the Israelis who always rail and talk in terms of the Nazis, if you will, and even the Russians who do not particularly care or have an affinity for the Jewish race, if you will. And you see these things happening along the frontier there in Israel. And then you look at this character, the Prime Minister, with this PowerPoint presentation. And if he's talking to anybody that has done any kind of research, reading, reflecting, and et cetera, that he's not even making stuff, he's taking statements and documentation from another time and another period, if you will. And he's saying that it's something that they have uncovered. I mean, the American media yesterday and today were shameless, if you will. They should be ashamed of themselves, as they were talking about. They got so carried away, they talked about that he and the Israeli Mossad, their so-called super intelligence agency, had taken out tons of classified documents that were in the possession of the Iranian government and military. Tons, they said. And then later on in the day, Wolf Blitzer, people like that, started giving numbers of 55 tons of documentation had been taken out of Iran, and it was now being used to quote unquote develop they didn't say new theory, I guess they couldn't bring themselves to say that, I assume, in front of the United Nations or the Nuclear Energy Agency or et cetera. They may try to say that. But it was fascinating for learned people, if you will. And I consider myself learned. I don't let the folks play the game that, black folks shouldn't be concerned about anything that happens other than at the chicken shack or down on the corner with the rest of the monkeys and et cetera. Oh yeah, that's how they talk about you, But one has to understand how to counter that, and there are certainly ways that takes place. So we're looking at that. We're looking at this great Israeli intelligence coup d'etat, if you will. Hundreds of thousands of documents weighed not by the pound, but by the ton. I mean, really, this is what Wolf Blitzer and others said all yesterday and into today and et cetera about what the Israelis, the Mossad had done and how great the Israeli intelligence services. Now, these are supposed to be liberal networks, CNN, MSNBC, if you will. Only the British BBC kind of, you could see that their commentators were told, hey, chill, just, you're going too far, because this is a part of a pressure play by the president and by the prime minister, in other words, America and Israel, to bring to their side of the table world public opinion that says that it's all right for what Donald Trump wants to do. Now, Donald Trump is a man who in the year and almost half that he has been president, that this is a part of his continued, I want to go to war. We said it last week and the week before, and we've said it when no one else would touch it. The president, I want to go to war with those people. Now, yesterday, by the way, he had the black president of Nigeria. I want to make sure, because some folks don't probably know where Nigeria is at. Nigeria, by the way, has a lot of oil, and they also have an entity called Boko Haram, which has been creating all kinds of problems, particularly in the north of Nigeria. But, as folks say, those are the monkeys and et cetera. We shouldn't be concerned with that. But anyways, they had kept it low key. When I say they, I'm talking in terms of the president's communications officers, et cetera, that a black head of state, that's what the Nigerian president is, if you will, was coming to pay a state visit. Now, state visits are very serious, very prestigious, very respectful, blah, 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 blah. Now, they must have really had to do some patchwork, over the last couple of months to get this done. It'd be interesting to see what black persons in the United States they may have tried to use, if you will, what kinds of economic deals were cut, because as we said, the greatest resource besides its people that the Nigerians have is oil. Got a lot of oil, a lot of oil. And in fact, most of the regimes of the Nigerian governments have handled that pretty poorly. That's the reason that they're having such civil conflict inside of Nigeria. But the Nigerian president was here yesterday, and the president took him into the Rose Garden, if you will. And I, I just didn't have the heart or the stomach to listen too much to Donald Trump because I had to think, what is this Nigerian president thinking when this man, president of the United States, you're standing at your dais, if you will, your lectures, if you will, with your national flags, you know, posted behind you. And this man who called you, your people, the continent that, you know, your nation is a part of and has been since the beginning of time, you know, called you garbage, if you will, savages, idiots, and et cetera, and probably more in the privacy of the White House with him and General Kelly, because I remember General Kelly is the same one who disrespected the mother and father, the wife, and Congresswoman Wilson after the death of David Johnson, quote unquote, one of those Americans that got left behind. We'll probably talk about that later on. We've been in conversation with with Congresswoman Wilson for some time, being kept up to date by her office as well as associates in Miami, where her legislative district is. But I thought about that. I mean, I looked at Big Donald, if you will, this big white man with blonde hair, looking at this black man standing just, 3 feet away from him, well, maybe 4 feet. And he was giving all these glowing praises of what a great man the president is. And then it came out from the communications office that when Donald Trump was elected president, that this president of Nigeria and the then president, who has just been ousted, of South Africa, had been the two black leaders that he had talked to in Black Africa. Well, probably given the limitations of Donald Trump as it pertains to intellect, if you will, including geography and et cetera. You know, Nigeria and South Africa were the only two African countries that he probably could remember, if you will. But then maybe he had, while some of his travels, met a black woman, you know, from South Africa or Nigeria. Maybe that's what the sister who he had Kelly fired and forced out of the White House a couple months ago may have reminded him. The man's mind is the way that it is, and it's more than disappointing. As I said before, as I've said before in this program, Donald Trump really is a disgrace to his race, really. You know, white folks used to always put that on black people many years ago until someone started getting hit in the mouth, is that well, that Negro is a disgrace to his race and to his people and et cetera. Well, Donald Trump is a disgrace to the race. He is a disgrace to everything that Caucasian America says that they stand for. And in the forefront of that is clearly the Republican Party. Think about that, the party of Lincoln. Lord have mercy, sweet Jesus, if you will. So as we move into the last 19 minutes of tonight's program, we want to bring you up to date on a situation that was really front and center in our beloved community. Now we're going local, domestic. And it had to do with light rail. And I'm going to throw a name out of a young lady whose family has resided in North Minneapolis since time immemorial, and who this young lady was born in North Minneapolis, attended North High School, etc. Had a very effective website and etc. 15 years ago, thereabouts. In 2010, a young lady by the name of Lisa Crockett, who was a go-getter, and her website was one of the most informational websites anywhere in the Twin Cities and et cetera. She kept the information flowing. She tried to make sure that her community, she loves the North Side, if you will, but she loves black people and et cetera. In 2010, Ms. Crockett, Lisa Crockett, approached yours truly. I had written a couple pieces. She also knew that at one point in time in history I was the manager of environmental affairs for Northern States Power Company, which later merged and is now Exxon, if you will. And she began to talk to me about some environmental problems, but she also began to talk in terms of the plan for light rail through Minneapolis. This is 2010 now. So we began to commiserate, work together. I had known her for many, many years. I knew other members of her family, but we began to corroborate, if you will, on this particular situation. And she did a lot of work because, you know, there were other things that I was working on, but we were raising questions about the building of the housing and the condition of the land and et cetera. And I've said for a number of years, 20 years in fact, that the land is very contaminated in North Minneapolis, if you will, and the water table is extremely high and et cetera. And unfortunately, folks are going to find out by and by just how much contamination is at play and why we have such a high percentage of cancer within the African American community, particularly those African Americans who were born and raised in the old Sumner Field housing projects and who now their ancestors, quote unquote, lived in an area where there were frightening numbers even before the construction of the Sumner Field homes in 1939. We have shown some pictures over the years here at Black Focus of some of the African American or Negro families. In fact, we still have in our collection, we have a very large collection, just as we have with the books here. It's reasonably said, as it pertains to what we're getting ready to tell you over the next 15 minutes. Those of you that can find it need to find the book Medical Apartheid. You really need to take a look at how a community is poisoned, as it was in, let's say, Flint, Michigan, but as it has been in places, particularly in the South, Mississippi, Louisiana specifically come to mind, if you will, chemical plants and et cetera, but that's for another program. So in 2010, 2011, Ms. Crockett, Lisa Crockett, began to knock on doors and began to post on her website that there should be a concern about light rail and what it was going to do to the African American community and et cetera. Well, as an outgrowth of that, political representatives decided they needed to start trying to, you know, balance, if you will, deal with statements that were being made and et cetera. I had in my newspaper column in the Spokesman Recorder and in front of these TV cameras here in MTN had began to raise questions about folks really need to ask what was really going on and et cetera, how much property would be taken, if you will, what would be the economic benefit to North Minneapolis and et cetera. And of course we spoke with great vision and wisdom because within a couple of years we were trying to alert people to what was getting ready to happen to the great People's Stadium, now known as U.S. Bank Stadium, which just hosted this past February the Super Bowl, and white community, white corporates made a lot of money. You know, black folk didn't make nothing. We're still waiting on the so-called report, if you will, from Mr. Tuttle, from the Stadium Authority, quote unquote, you ain't gonna never get it, from the legislature, if you will, who had a special committee of both houses, if you will, the Senate and the House of Representatives, and they were to give us the figures of how many black folks worked on the stadium, and then just a couple months ago, how much money was being made by the black community, that millions and millions and millions of dollars was being taken in by black businesses and et cetera. I had to pinch myself periodically because I thought I was in a parallel universe, because I said, this can't be the city I live in with all of this so-called prosperity and et cetera. None of those reports have been forthcoming. But about a month and a half ago, my attention was called to the beginning of construction work along Penn Avenue, if you will, but also along Olson Highway. Particularly in front of, as we kind of mentioned tongue-in-cheek the other day on our national radio program, OIC, if you will. And next thing we knew, the signs went up, you know, come March, whatever, Penn Avenue will be closed, if you will, for construction and et cetera. So I began to quietly ask questions of those who are supposedly knowledgeable and et cetera. Clearly the most knowledgeable person as it pertains to really having gone out here and tried to alert this community was Lisa Crockett, if you will. And folks, you know, seemed to almost have amnesia. You know, in some cases it was, you know, too close to the baseball season, the NFL draft, if you will, a new white quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings, Kirk Cousins. And I'm like, okay. So I started then putting little feelers out, little pieces of cheese, if you will. And I said, well, does this have anything to do you think, with light rail? No. And that would be for the leaders that would even bother to allow you to buttonhole, if you will. So, when the legislature convened a month and a half ago, I quietly sent operatives, if you will, there. Certain documents were looked at. And then went back and took a look at the tremendous and effective job that Lisa Crockett did in 2010, 11, and 12 until people started bad-mouthing her and undermining her and attacking her credibility and et cetera. Now, in 2010, 2011, the African-American community and all of quote-unquote North Minneapolis, particularly in what is called the lower 30, well, in this case, the lower 10s and 20s, black folks were being told, oh, you had many meetings at particularly UROC, if you will, University of Minnesota's research facility there on Plymouth Avenue, which you can't hardly get in the parking lot now because the building that is to house the world headquarters, the world headquarters of Thor Construction, if you will, the dream child of Richard Copeland, if you will, and others, has backed all the way up to the extent that, you know, you can walk out of the back door of Thor Construction's worldwide headquarters into the back door of UROC, and in fact, if you go in the right door, you'll go in a facility and rooms where a lot of information has been gathered on you folks in the black community, if you will, and particularly you and your children. This was particularly mothers and et cetera. And then turned over to Dr. Chiquette at the University of Minnesota and et cetera, and then working through Stella West at the place now called North Point, which was founded as Pilot City 40, 50 years ago. And so I reviewed the documents, and so today, in preparation for this program and wanting to make sure my mind was as fresh as possible, if you will, you know how it is with us black folks, we really don't know what's going on, you know, things are too complex for us and et cetera. So I talked with and went over with Lisa Crockett information that she had gathered, information I had gathered, and documentation that I had taken into my possession about a decade ago. Newspaper articles, documents, and et cetera, but it was particularly the newspaper articles because these are white papers, if you will. Now, it wasn't none of the colored papers. In fact, some of it was long before the beloved Cecil Newman came here in 1934 to find the Minnesota, or at that time it was called the Minneapolis Spokesman St. Paul Recorder. And what I reviewed in consultation with Lisa Crockett, if you will, this morning and this afternoon by phone, reviewing, texting, and et cetera, I went all the way back to a collection of documents, yes, black people know how to collect documents, of documents and newspaper articles from the Minneapolis Journal, Minneapolis Trib, Minneapolis Times, if you will, Minneapolis Star. I went back as far as 1908, yes, when there started to be concerns about the high percentage of deformed births in the area then known as the Sumner neighborhood, if you will, which led to the construction of Sumner Field that many of us grew up on in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and etc. And what I discussed with Ms. Crockett and comparing the data and etc. that she had brought into play, research, attempted to share with this community, that young lady attempted to alert this community to what is happening. And what it has to do with is the full environmental impact of putting in this light rail. In fact, it's one of the reasons that the white folks to the south of us, inside the city of Minneapolis, around Kenwood and Bryn Mawr and back towards the southwest corner of the city and etc., have been fighting the blazes out of, is that folks are finally recognizing what this is doing to the environmental stability of their city. Now, the folks way out there in Eden Prairie and etc., where the southwest light rail is supposed to be coming in, had already began, they had the resources, had began to peak that. But in 2010, 11, and 12, this young lady, Lisa Crockett, tirelessly knocking on doors, handing out surveys and et cetera, going to the meetings. I remember early on that there would be meetings at UROC. It was always the place to have it. In fact, they wouldn't let the black folks at Phyllis Wheatley fraudulent slip Phyllis Wheatley, because there's nothing happening there. That's the Urban League. They didn't want them to have the meetings there, needed to have the meetings at UROC. Now, the reason is UROC has a much better recording system, if you will, to record and to give video review of what it was. But I remember at least 2 meetings, my friends, and there are those of you that watch this program, where they had 200 North Minneapolis and Minneapolis' good citizens talking about the light rail. Now, in 2011, the state representatives, if you will, and the United States congressmen, if you will, for the 5th Congressional District and others, were saying that by 2014, now this was in 2011, that 2014, this will all be completed. Light rail will be on the move. We'll be linking as far north as St. Cloud, if you will, with downtown Minneapolis, and all points south to the International Airport and St. Paul and et cetera. Now, in a number of my newspaper columns in that particular period of time, if you will, working closely with some knowledgeable individuals who were a part of my team when I was the manager of environmental affairs for Northern States Power Company, large, one of the largest utility companies in America that, as we said, merged with a company called XL in Colorado and etc. And I remember sitting in those meetings, and I remember sitting in the studio, because at that time we were broadcasting from St. Anthony, Maine. And I can well remember appealing, talking, and showing some of the material that I had been able to take control of, if you will. Some of it, much of it from the old Minneapolis Library, where on the site of the old Minneapolis Library there on the Nicollet Mall now sits the new one. But it was interesting, the documentation. People don't know, as an example, that there is a massive tunnel that is actually under what is called Olson Memorial Highway, under the freeway, if you will, and going to the Mississippi River. I gotta tell you, for those of you that really have the concern and the patience and at least the dignity to find out how your community is dying, if you will. As we said, I can take you back to 1908, newspaper stories talking in terms of the pollution. Ah, yes, a word used back then. The pollution that was killing the lakes, if you will, the chain of lakes, the Cedar Lake, and back to Nokomis and places like that. And the deaths that had taken place in 1922 and 23 in that big tunnel that was being built because of something that medically folks still really don't know and understand, called radon gas, which is a contaminant, if you will, that still infects our children and our elderly and et cetera. You know, I've always felt badly about the fact that we were never able to get the kind of information out about how many of our people